Right, that cuppa you're drinking might contain plastic particles, artificial flavouring, and pesticide residues, but barely any proper tea leaves. Today we're exposing 15 teas that aren't actually 100% tea, and I'll tell you what, some of these are sitting in your kitchen cupboard right now. From supermarket-owned brands to so-called premium blends, these brews are cutting corners you need to know about. Dust and Fannings, Twinings' secret? Let's start with Britain's most trusted name, and here's the uncomfortable truth. Twinings. Every day contains what the industry calls dust and fannings, which are essentially the sweepings from the tea factory floor after proper leaves have been processed. These tiny particles are the lowest grade of tea possible, creating that distinctively bitter, one-dimensional flavour that requires milk and sugar to be palatable. What makes this particularly dodgy is the paper tea bags themselves, which contain up to 25% polypropylene plastic to seal them, meaning every time you steep one, you're releasing microplastics into your brew. The irony is that Twinings produces excellent loose-leaf teas using whole leaves from quality estates, but those cost 3 times as much as this everyday range, proving they know exactly what proper tea should be, but choose to sell you inferior product at inflated prices. Traditional loose-leaf tea uses whole leaves that unfurl during steeping, releasing complex flavours naturally, without needing sealed bags or plastic components. The company's 300-year heritage convinces British tea drinkers this is quality, but you're paying £2.50 for 80 bags of factory floor sweepings sealed in plastic. Pyramids hide plastic nightmare? Here's one that'll surprise you. Those fancy pyramid bags that PG Tips claims allow the tea to move freely contain petroleum-based plastic mesh that never fully biodegrades. PG Tips uses grade 3 and 4 tea, which is primarily broken leaves and fannings, producing that aggressively strong, slightly harsh flavour that British builders have somehow accepted as proper tea. What's particularly concerning is that when you pour boiling water over these plastic pyramids, they release billions of microplastic particles directly into your cup, particles small enough to enter your bloodstream. The company switched to pyramids in 1996, marketing them as premium innovation, when they were actually just a way to use the same low-grade tea while charging more for fancy packaging that damages your health and the environment. The free-range marketing suggests something natural and premium, but you're essentially making tea with plastic tea bags filled with low-grade leaf fragments. At £3.50 for 40 bags in most supermarkets, you're paying for clever marketing and a chimpanzee mascot rather than quality tea leaves, and those plastic pyramids will sit in landfills for centuries after you've finished your brew. Round bags, rectangular deception? Right, here's the tea that invented the round tea bag, and that's about the only innovation they've managed. Tetley Original contains primarily grade 4 tea, broken orange, pekoe and fannings, which creates that flat, unremarkable flavour that requires a good splash of milk to be drinkable. The round bag itself contains polypropylene plastic in the seams and along the edges, releasing microplastics every time you make a brew, and the bag material is bleached using chlorine, leaving trace chemical residues. What makes this particularly misleading is their seriously good tea slogan, when the leaves inside are seriously low grade, sourced from mass production estates in Kenya and India, where quality control focuses on quantity rather than flavour complexity. The round shape was introduced in 1989 as a marketing gimmick to differentiate from competitors, but it does nothing for flavour and actually uses more packaging material per bag than traditional square bags, increasing both cost and environmental impact. Traditional British tea merchants like Fortnum and Mason use whole leaf grades from single estates, creating teas with actual character and depth. At £2.80 for 80 bags, you're paying for 150 years of brand heritage rather than brewing quality. And British tea drinkers who grew up with Tetley deserve to know they're drinking plastic-contaminated, low-grade leaf dust. American import betrays tea tradition. Now here's the tea that's conquered the world through aggressive marketing rather than quality. Lipton Yellow Label contains the absolute lowest grade of tea possible, primarily dust with some fannings, creating that distinctively weak, slightly bitter flavour that lacks any complexity or depth. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic and are bleached with chlorine dioxide, releasing both microplastics and chemical residues into your brew with every cup. What's particularly cynical is how Unilever, the parent company, has optimised this tea for shelf life and cost-effectiveness rather than flavour. Using tea from massive production facilities across multiple countries where leaves are processed within hours of picking to maximise throughput. They also add natural flavouring to some varieties, which sounds innocent, but is actually laboratory-created compounds designed to mask the poor quality of the base tea. The brand was founded by Thomas Lipton in 1890 with genuinely good tea from his Ceylon estates. But after corporate buyouts and cost optimization over the past century, it's become the opposite of what its founder intended. Traditional tea blending requires skill and quality leaves, with proper grading and tasting to create consistent, flavourful brews. The fact that Lipton is one of the world's best-selling teas says more about marketing budgets than tea quality, and British drinkers paying £2.50 for 80 bags deserve to know they're drinking industrial tea production at its most cost-effective. God's Own County sells plastic grade 3. Here's the Yorkshire tea that's fooled British drinkers with regional pride and clever advertising. Yorkshire tea contains predominantly grade 3 tea, broken leaves and fannings from Kenya, Assam and Sri Lanka, creating that robust, malty flavour that masks the lack of whole leaf complexity. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic in the heat-sealed edges, meaning every brew releases microplastics, and they've only recently started transitioning to plant-based bags after years of environmental pressure. What makes this particularly dodgy is the hard water version they sell, which is essentially the same tea with slightly different proportions to account for mineral content, charging a premium for what's basically the same product. Despite the Yorkshire name and heritage, the company is owned by Betty's and Taylor's Group and sources absolutely zero tea from Yorkshire itself because tea doesn't grow in Britain's climate, making the regional branding purely emotional marketing. The Yorkshire branding and those adverts with Sean Bean convince British drinkers this is proper northern tea heritage, but you're really just drinking grade 3 African and Asian tea packaged in Harrogate. At £3.20 for 80 bags, you're paying for regional marketing, rather than superior quality, and traditional loose-leaf Yorkshire tea merchants prove that genuine local heritage means sourcing and blending with actual care. Own brand plastic pesticide cocktail. Here's the supermarket own brand that millions of Britons drink daily. Sainsbury's Red Label contains the lowest possible grade of tea, almost entirely dust and fannings, sourced from whichever supplier offers the cheapest price that month, meaning consistency and quality vary constantly. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic and are bleached using chlorine compounds, releasing both microplastics and chemical residues into every cup you brew. What's particularly concerning is that supermarket own brands rarely disclose which estates supply their tea, making it impossible to verify pesticide use, labour conditions, or environmental practices. Testing has shown that budget supermarket teas can contain residues from up to 17 different pesticides, all within legal limits individually, but never tested for cumulative effects. The Red Label branding has been Sainsbury's standard tea since the 1960s, trading on decades of British shopping habits and brand loyalty, while the actual quality has declined steadily as cost-cutting intensified. They also use the absolute minimum amount of tea per bag, around 2 grams compared to 2.5 to 3 grams in premium brands, meaning you're getting weak, flavourless brews that require longer steeping times, releasing even more plastic particles. At £1.50 for 80 bags, you might think you're saving money, but you're drinking pesticide-contaminated, plastic leaching, lowest grade tea dust with zero traceability or quality assurance. Right, if this is making you rethink what's in your teapot, do us a favour and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this list. Guilty of drinking these? Comment below. Now let's crack on with number 9. Britain's cheapest tea disaster. Here's the absolute bottom of British tea quality. and the price reflects it. Tesco Everyday Value contains nothing but dust, the finest particles left after all other tea grades have been sorted, creating that thin, metallic, slightly bitter flavour that's barely recognisable as tea. The tea bags use the cheapest paper available, sealed with polypropylene plastic and bleached with chlorine, releasing microplastics and chemical residues while providing almost no actual tea flavour. What makes this particularly concerning is that at 75 pence for 80 bags, the economics are impossible unless you're using the absolute worst quality tea from the most industrial production facilities. This tea is sourced from whichever estate is cheapest that quarter, with zero concern for sustainable practices, pesticide use, or worker welfare, meaning you're potentially supporting exploitative labour while drinking contaminated tea dust. The everyday value branding suggests sensible, economical shopping for families, but it's actually just a race to the bottom, where Tesco sacrifices every aspect of quality to hit price points that attract struggling households. The tea bags also contain minimal tea content, sometimes as little as 1.5 grams per bag, meaning you're paying for hot water with a vague suggestion of tea flavour. British pensioners on tight budgets often buy this thinking they're being sensible, but you'd be better off drinking half as much of a proper loose-leaf tea that actually contains quality leaves and flavour complexity. Poverty price plastic punishment. Here's another supermarket budget tea that's betraying British brewing standards. Asda Smart Price contains pure dust-grade tea with no whole or broken leaves whatsoever, creating that distinctively weak, slightly sour flavour that requires 3 bags to make one decent brew. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic seals and chlorine-bleached paper, meaning every cup releases billions of microplastic particles that accumulate in your body over time. What's particularly cynical is how these budget ranges target low-income families and elderly people on fixed incomes, offering apparent value while delivering the lowest possible quality. Testing on Smart Price tea has revealed pesticide residues from multiple chemicals used in industrial tea production, all technically within legal limits but never tested for how they interact when consumed together daily for years. The Smart Price range was introduced in 2007 during the financial crisis, positioning Asda as the value champion for struggling families, but it really just normalised rock-bottom quality as acceptable for Britain's poorest consumers. The tea is sourced from whichever supplier offers rock-bottom prices, with zero traceability or ethical oversight, meaning you've no idea about the conditions under which it was grown or processed. At 68 pence for 80 bags, this represents the absolute floor of tea quality, and British shoppers deserve transparency about what they're actually drinking rather than being exploited through poverty pricing. Savers range, drinkers lose. Now here's the Morrison's budget offering that's cutting every possible corner. Morrison's Savers tea contains exclusively dust and finest fannings, producing that characteristically flat, slightly metallic flavour with no depth or complexity whatsoever. The tea bags use cheap paper sealed with polypropylene plastic and bleached with chlorine dioxide, releasing microplastics and chemical residues into every brew you make. What makes this particularly concerning is the complete lack of supply chain transparency, with tea sourced from whichever estate offers the lowest prices regardless of quality, environmental practices, or labour standards. The bags contain minimal tea content, around 1.8 grams compared to 2.5 to 3 grams in quality brands, meaning you're essentially paying for flavoured hot water with a vague suggestion of tea. The Savers branding suggests you're being smart with money, but you're actually drinking the lowest grade of tea possible, contaminated with plastic particles and potentially pesticide residues, with zero ethical oversight or quality assurance. At 70 pence for 80 bags, this tea represents everything wrong with modern supermarket culture. Race to the bottom pricing that sacrifices quality, health and ethics for minimal cost savings. Co-op values forget tea quality? Here's the tea from Britain's ethical supermarket, and the irony is stark. Co-op 99 contains predominantly dust and low-grade fannings, creating that weak, slightly bitter flavour that's barely distinguishable from hot water with brown colouring. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic seals, despite Co-op's environmental credentials, releasing microplastics with every brew, and the paper is chlorine bleached, leaving chemical residues. What's particularly disappointing is that Co-op built its reputation on ethical trading and quality products, yet their budget tea range shows the same corner cutting as every other supermarket. The tea is sourced from mass production estates with minimal oversight, potentially containing pesticide residues from up to 15 different chemicals used in industrial farming. Testing has shown that the actual tea content per bag is around 1.9 grams, below what's needed for proper flavour extraction, meaning you're making weak, unsatisfying brews that waste time and kettle electricity. The Co-op's fair trade commitment doesn't extend to their budget range, meaning the farmers growing this tea receive minimal compensation, while you pay £1.20 for 80 bags of lowest grade dust sealed in plastic bags that contaminate both your tea and the environment. Essential greed in posh packaging? Right, here's the budget offering from Britain's upmarket grocer, and it's no better than the rest. Waitrose. Essential tea contains grade 4 tea, broken leaves, fannings and dust, creating that disappointingly ordinary flavour you'd never expect from a store trading on quality and heritage. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic, despite Waitrose's premium positioning, releasing microplastics into your brew, while the chlorine-bleached paper adds chemical residues. What makes this particularly misleading is the Waitrose branding, which convinces middle-class British shoppers they're buying something superior when it's fundamentally the same low-grade tea as cheaper supermarkets. The Essential range allows Waitrose to compete on price while maintaining their premium image. But what you're actually buying is industrial-grade tea dust sourced from whoever's cheapest, packaged in plastic-contaminated bags. The tea content per bag is around 2 grams, barely adequate for a decent brew, and the sourcing practices show none of the ethical oversight Waitrose claims for their premium ranges. At £2.50 for 80 bags, you're paying a premium over other supermarket budget teas for essentially the same product with fancier packaging, proving that even upmarket retailers will sacrifice quality for profit margins when they think customers won't notice. Fair trade. Unfair quality. Here's the discount supermarket tea masquerading as ethical. Lidl Fair Globe contains predominantly fannings and dust from fair trade certified estates, which sounds responsible until you realise fair trade certification says nothing about tea grade or quality, only about farmer compensation. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic seals and chlorine-bleached paper, releasing microplastics and chemical residues into every cup, despite the ethical branding. What's particularly cynical is how Lidl uses fair trade certification to charge premium prices for budget quality tea, £1.80 for 80 bags, compared to their standard range at £1.20, convincing well-meaning British shoppers they're doing good while still receiving lowest grade tea dust. The tea itself produces that thin, slightly sour flavour characteristic of pure fannings, with minimal complexity or depth, requiring milk and sugar to be remotely palatable. Testing has shown these tea bags contain similar pesticide residues to non-fair trade budget teas, because certification focuses on labour practices rather than chemical use or environmental standards. You're essentially paying extra for farmer welfare while still drinking plastic-contaminated, low-grade tea dust, proving that ethical marketing doesn't automatically mean quality product. Discount diplomat? Dodgy deal? Now here's the German discounter's answer to British tea culture, and it's absolute rubbish. Aldi Diplomat contains the lowest grade tea possible, almost pure dust with traces of fannings, sourced from whichever estate offers rock-bottom prices, with zero consideration for quality or consistency. The tea bags use cheap paper sealed with polypropylene plastic and bleached with chlorine, releasing billions of microplastic particles and chemical residues into every brew. What makes this particularly offensive is how Aldi has marketed itself as offering supermarket quality at discount prices, when their tea proves they're actually offering discount quality at discount prices. The tea produces that characteristically metallic flat flavour with no body or depth, often requiring 2 or 3 bags to make one drinkable cup. The sourcing practices show zero transparency or ethical oversight, meaning you've no idea about pesticide use, labour conditions or environmental impact, and testing has revealed residues from multiple agricultural chemicals. At £1.10 for 80 bags, Aldi Diplomat represents the absolute bottom of German efficiency applied to British tea culture. Maximum cost cutting with minimum quality, wrapped in packaging that suggests premium continental imports, when you're really drinking industrially produced Asian tea dust processed in Eastern Europe. Pound buys plastic pesticide brew. Here's the tea from Britain's budget retail chain, and the quality matches the price point. Poundland's various tea offerings contain exclusively dust-grade tea with 0 whole or broken leaves, creating that weak, slightly chemical flavour that barely registers as tea at all. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic seals and the cheapest bleached paper available, releasing massive amounts of microplastics because quality control on sealing is minimal at this price point. What's particularly concerning is the complete absence of supply chain information. This tea could be coming from anywhere, processed under any conditions, with any level of pesticide contamination, and you'd never know. The bags contain minimal tea content, sometimes as little as 1.3 grams, meaning you're essentially paying for hot water with brown colouring and calling it tea. Testing on pound shop teas has revealed concerning levels of fluoride from poor quality leaves, pesticide residues from multiple chemicals, and even traces of contamination from poor storage and handling. The various varieties they offer, English breakfast, builder's brew, traditional, are essentially the same dust-grade tea with different packaging, and at £1 for 80 bags, you're getting exactly what you pay for. The absolute worst quality tea available in Britain, contaminated with plastics and chemicals, with zero ethical oversight or quality assurance. Mixed flavours mask quality disaster. Right, here's the ultimate insult to British tea drinkers. Those variety packs with English breakfast, Earl Grey, and various fruit flavours. These contain the absolute lowest grade of tea dust as the base. Then they add artificial flavouring compounds, dried fruit pieces that contribute zero actual flavour, and synthetic bergamot oil in the Earl Grey that's nothing like real bergamot. The tea bags contain polypropylene plastic and are often individually wrapped in additional plastic and foil, meaning you're getting multiple layers of packaging waste and microplastic contamination with every brew. What makes this particularly cynical is how these packs target people wanting variety and sophistication, charging premium prices, often £3 to £4 for just 40 bags, for what's essentially the lowest quality tea dust available, masked with artificial flavouring. The fruit varieties contain almost no actual fruit, just tea dust with flavouring compounds and sometimes colourings to make them look appealing, creating drinks that taste nothing like real fruit or real tea. The Earl Grey uses synthetic bergamot flavouring, rather than real bergamot oil, which proper tea companies source from Calabria in Italy, creating that distinctive artificial taste that bears no resemblance to traditional Earl Grey. These packs also suffer from cross-contamination, with flavours bleeding between varieties because they're packed together, meaning your English breakfast tastes slightly of lemon and your Earl Grey tastes of mixed berries. British tea drinkers who buy these thinking they're treating themselves to variety are actually paying premium prices for the absolute worst quality tea available, contaminated with plastics, laden with artificial flavours, and wrapped in excessive packaging. You'd be infinitely better off buying one good quality loose leaf tea and actually tasting what proper tea should be, rather than drinking this industrial chemistry experiment, masquerading as sophisticated tea selection. Well, there you have it. 15 teas that aren't quite what they claim to be, from supermarket-owned brands to budget bargains that betray centuries of British tea tradition. Next time you're making a brew, maybe consider proper loose-leaf tea from a traditional merchant, or at least know what you're actually drinking. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and click on the next video on your screen to learn more about what's really in your cuppa. Cheers!